Hello everyone. I did not have a chance to go back yet. So let's go ahead and 18, 17. Go back 1745. How's that sound? I was going to stop for the people who are like, what? I was going to stop at the 18-minute mark, but I just let it keep going because something was starting to happen and I knew it was a stupid idea as soon as I said it. Change things up a little bit. You can there's a thanks button on the channel. You can donate. You don't have to. Subscribe if you aren't, if this is what you like. Click the bell. It notifies you for things. And if you don't want to do any of that, click the thumbs up. It's completely free. Helps me out. So let's get into part two. As we know, Jake McNasty McNiece has the Germans across from him on a bridge that was blown up. The Germans, it sounds like they're retreating from Normandy, and he's telling them they can surrender, they can put up a fight and wait for the Americans that are basically coming behind them, or they can try to go down in this ravine, cross this bridge area, the bridge is gone, and just basically be gunned down. So that's the ultimatum he might be giving now, or he already gave, but here we go.
Fighting positions. Now, I don't know what you know about military tactics, but generally speaking, it is a terrible idea to run face first into machine gun fire. It's also a terrible idea to try to fight the enemy when they have the high ground. If you don't believe me, ask Anakin. But running face first into a fortified machine gun position through a moat while they have the high ground, and the men running the machine guns are under the command of some American with a mohawk, Native American face paint, who everybody calls Jake McNasty, is literally a lifetime supply worth of shitty ideas. Jake and his men would hold their fire until the majority of the Germans made their way into the water, at which point they would open fire with 4 heavy cruise-served machine guns, 2 mortar tubes, and a bunch of small arms, effectively mowing down and decimating the entire German battalion. On that day, Jake and his ragtag group of paratroopers were credited with removing 700 enemy combatants from the field. Shortly after that,
They got every single one of them. Wow. But think about this. Oh, stop. Think about this. The alternative for the Germans was what? Hey, stop. The alternative for the Germans is what? It's the 35 soldiers. They were just like, we'll be fine. We can get over it. No, don't do that.
Reinforcements from Utah Beach show up. Jake goes over to a small town. They get put in a holding position for a little while. Then Jake's small group of ragtag paratroopers all get evac'd, where they get broken up and sent back to their original units, where they get regrouped and refitted to return to war. Jake McNiece would find himself getting evac'd all the way back to France, where he would be reunited with the 5 surviving members of the Filthy 13, as well as receiving a bunch of new recruits for his platoon. At this point, they had a couple weeks off where they could drink, relax, do whatever. Jake's going out, he's getting drunk, he's having a good time. Then he would receive word that his platoon is going to be partaking in a new airborne operation referred to as Operation Market Garden, the largest airborne operation in human history, with 38,000 paratroopers jumping into Nazi-occupied Holland. Hearing that
I know a little bit about Market Garden. Wasn't it deemed a failure?
he was going to be jumping into Holland, Jake figured that he was going to be engaging in a lot of close quarters combat, so he opted to turn in his M1 Grand and get a Thompson, which is exactly what he did. He then received word that his platoon, being the bridge experts that they are, were going to have to go out, capture a bunch of bridges, defend them, and or get rid of them until they heard word otherwise.
Hey, look, I made a bridge. It only took me like, what, 10 seconds?
And pretty much everything goes according to plan there. They jump in, they get to the bridge, they take the bridge over, they hold it for a couple of weeks, then they receive word that they are to go help another unit take over this town known as Eindhoven. So Jake and his men make their way over to Eindhoven, and they begin helping to clear out this town, room by room, building by building, close quarters combat, them versus the Germans. In his book, Jake described this close quarter combat as very...
He has a book? Okay, so he lives.
Different from what you see today. It wasn't 4 troops stacked up outside a door, kicking it in, and all running in together. It was one guy, one room. An American would kick open the door, throw in a frag grenade. As soon as the frag grenade blew up, the American would then crawl in on his hands and knees with a Thompson submachine gun and shoot anybody that survived. The reason they crawled in on their hands and knees is because, according to Jake, the grenade would kick up so much dust and soot and debris in these old buildings that you couldn't see standing at normal level. So you had to drop down like you were in a fire trying to avoid carbon monoxide to be able to see what you were doing. And this is how they cleared the entire village, making...
Anybody else ever heard of that? That's kind of crazy.
Their way all the way through it. About halfway through, Jake would be clearing a building where somebody clearly used to make furniture, at which point Jake would find a chicken. Now, this chicken had 6 eggs. Finding eggs in the middle of a war zone in World War II was a big deal. Nobody had eggs, and Jake fucking loves eggs, okay? This is amazing. Only problem, he's got to figure out how to get these 6 eggs all the way through this village without breaking them. So he thinks for himself to a second, maybe I could leave the eggs here and I'll come back for them later. And he's like, no, that's not going to work because one of these other paratroopers is going to find my eggs and these are my eggs, I want them. So he takes all the eggs and sticks them in the cargo pocket of his pants. And then every time he clears a room, rather than crawling in on his arms and legs, he slides in on one side, the side without the eggs, to ensure that he doesn't damage any of his precious eggs, which is the most gangster shit I've ever heard in my entire life. This dude is going toe-to-toe in close quarters combat against enemies with submachine guns trying to kill him, and his primary concern is not fucking up breakfast. This is like a stupid video game achievement for when you want to play it on extra hardcore mode. It's almost like this man knows that he has plot armor. It's absolutely incredible. So he continues to go on, clears out the entire village, doesn't break a single egg. It's absolutely incredible. They get to the other side of the village. They're like, sweet, we cleared out all the Germans. And then across the field, out of the wood line, pulls an entire German mechanized unit with 10 tanks. At this point, Jake is like, I just want to eat my fucking eggs. This sucks. So Jake and the Filthy 13 go to work. Being the demolition men, it's their job to go around to the tanks and disable their tracks so they can no longer move, and then the infantry's gonna come in with their flamethrowers and cook the enemy out. And that's exactly what happens. Everything goes according to plan. They take out all 10 tanks. Not really that big of a deal. Jake reaches into his pocket. Tragedy strikes. He's broken a single egg. It only took 10 German tanks to make this guy fumble enough to break a single egg, and he got to enjoy 5 eggs for dinner that night. Jake and his men would then adopt a holding position where they would chill out for a little bit, hold their position until they got evac'd again for yet another huge mission where Jake and his men would find themselves back in France for a second time. So Jake and his men find themselves at an army base right outside of Reims, France. Obviously, Jake and his men want to go drink in town, have a good time, see if they can find some women, you know, what have you. The only problem is, apparently the 82nd Airborne was there last month, and the 82nd Airborne caused such an issue in town that the military had to bring in a special group of MPs to get the 82nd Airborne under control, and now all paratroopers have been effectively banned from town. I mean, to be fair, that's pretty on brand for the 82nd Airborne. Bunch of rowdy dudes. If you don't know, that's their logo. On paper, AA stands for All American, but everybody knows that it actually stands for Athletic Alcoholics. Now, Jake, wanting to drink anyways, comes up with a plan. He's got to hook up with a distillery all the way over in Paris, which is like a 2-day trip away. So, Jake gets a 72-hour pass, starts leaving to go to Paris. His commanding officer stops him and is like, Jake, what are you doing? I'm going to Paris to get some booze for the boys. Jake, Paris is 2 days away. Do you really think that you're going to be able to take 2 days to travel to Paris, go on a week-long bender, and then travel 2 days back all in 72 hours? At which point, Jake looks at the officer and says, and I quote, I don't know. I wouldn't be willing to bet on it, but I'm willing to try. At which point the officer...
This guy's crazy. I love this guy. He's my uncle. Jake McNasty McNiece. That's my uncle now. I've declared it.
Kind of just rolls his eyes and is like, is there anything I can do to stop you? Jake, not really. So the officer just lets him go because he realizes that Jake's going no matter what. It's just a matter of if he wants to get his ass beat over it or not. So Jake makes his way to Paris, goes on a couple-day bender, gets a bunch of booze for the boys, heads back to base. He finally gets back. He's been AWOL for 5 days. They immediately throw him in the stockade for abandoning his post, at which point his command comes up to him and is like, Jake, we've been talking. We really want you to volunteer for Pathfinder School. At which point, Jake kind of has a little bit of a panic attack and he's like, they're trying to kill me. Like, they're actively trying to kill me. You see, if you don't know what a Pathfinder is, they're basically paratroopers, but they go out hours or a day before the big, huge paratrooper operation, and they jump beforehand, and then they figure out the best spots to drop all the other paratroopers and radio it back to base so they know where to put everybody. This job during World War II was incredibly dangerous. On a given airborne operation, it required 2 Pathfinders and 1 set of radio equipment to get the mission done. And on
to be an airborne person, you're pretty much crazy anyways. You're jumping out of a plane, you're trusting a parachute, and then you're behind enemy lines. So being a Pathfinder, yeah, still crazy, but at the same time, he was made for that. He was made for that.
Every mission, they would drop 10 Pathfinders and 2 sets of equipment because they knew that on average, 8 of them were going to die and 1 set of equipment was going to be damaged or lost. They had a 80% fatality rate on any one mission at any point during World War II. And that is why Jake thought for sure they're trying to get me killed. The only silver lining here is they can't make him do it, because Pathfinder is so dangerous that it was strictly a voluntary basis only. But Jake wasn't one to act too quick, so he said he'd think about it. And he goes and he thinks about it, and he's thinking about...
And they were like, we'll give you some eggs. And he was just like, deal.
the war, and he starts to think to himself, you know, Pathfinder school is all the way over in England. By the time they send me there, I start school, I finish school, there's a good chance this war might be over altogether, and I'm not gonna have to make another combat jump. It'll be great. So he's like kind of on the fence about it now, and then he really starts thinking about it, and he's like, man, Pathfinder school's at an Air Force base, and even back in World War II, the Air Force had way better food than the Army. So now he might not have to do any more combat jumps, and he's gonna get some good food. And then it dawns on him. The Air Force base where they teach Pathfinder school is 8 miles down the road from Oxford University, and all the young British men are fighting a war right now, meaning that Oxford is just full of college chicks. And as Jake said himself, and I quote, "This seemed like a mighty fine opportunity to do some postgraduate work." Fucking love this guy. So Jake shows up to Pathfinder school, and he's immediately called into the commander's office, which is weird because he hasn't even done anything wrong yet. Jake goes in there, the commander's like,
he hasn't done anything wrong yet.
"Hi Jake, I've heard all about you. I want you to be acting first sergeant." At which point Jake is like, "I don't know what you heard about me, but you heard wrong. I'm technically not even a private first class yet. I've never been promoted. I am not the leader that you want. I don't care about saluting. I don't care about any of that dog and pony show military stuff. I'm here to fight a war, and that's it." At which point the commander's like, "That's exactly why I want you. I don't need you to salute me. I don't need you to call me sir. I need you to get these guys ready for war, and I don't think there's anybody better to do it than you. I'll make sure that you end up getting paid as a first sergeant the entire time you're an acting first sergeant." To which Jake replies, I don't really care about the money. Look, I've blown up every safe between here and Normandy. I have plenty of money, okay? I might be willing to do this job, but if I'm gonna do it, there's gonna be some terms. Anybody that's fighting for me is gonna keep having good Air Force food, and they get permanent leave whenever they want it. At that point, the commander agrees. Jake is now the acting first sergeant, which, if you don't know, is the polar opposites of the spectrum as far as enlisted rank goes. So per usual, Jake excels at pretty much everything all through Pathfinder school. They graduate, Jake is still acting first sergeant, and he gets to decide which person is in which platoon. So naturally, Jake does what anybody would do, and he builds a dream team of the 20 best Pathfinders out of all 400 and puts himself with that platoon. Now at this point, it's really looking like Jake might never have to go out on a mission as a Pathfinder because the war is really dwindling down at this point. Then, December 16th, 1944, the Germans would launch a last-ditch effort counteroffensive to try to fight Allied forces. This would be known as the Battle of the Bulge, where they would cut off the 101st Airborne, Jake's old division, inside the town of Bastogne, completely surround them, and the 101st Airborne is now stuck in this city. They are running out of ammunition, they're running out of food, and they're running out of gas. And if they end up surrendering, it could turn the entire tide of World War II. So all they need is somebody to be able to parachute in, get in town, and be able to call in resupply drops to let the 101st Airborne have a fighting chance to be able to hold off the Germans long enough for Patton to show up with his army of 350,000 men. So you've got a crazy mission. Somebody needs to save the day. You're calling upon Jake and his dream team. There hasn't been a single radio transmission to come out of the 101st Airborne in over 2 days. Despite that, Jake and his dream team are going to jump in anyways. They have to be able to hit a 2-mile diameter landing zone while jumping out of a plane that's traveling 160 miles an hour, utilizing parachutes that they can't steer. This mission is seemingly impossible, but here they go. They jump out of the planes, they hit the landing zone perfectly. One man, unfortunately, does die, but that is a 5% fatality rate compared to the average of 80. Jake and his men then immediately get to work setting up their equipment in opposite.
And that could have been faulty chute or, being shot at, whatever. I mean, 20 of them, 21 jumped. I mean, it's bad to say, but yeah, you take those odds, unfortunately.
Sides of town, and after one guy calls in one resupply, he picks up his stuff, moves to a different location, then this guy calls in his resupply, picks up, moves to a different location, and they bounce the signal back and forth on opposite sides of town all day, sending signals for resupply. They do this because they know the Germans can triangulate their radio equipment and don't want them to start utilizing artillery to take them out. Within the first 24 hours of Jake and his men landing, they called in 247 C-47s for resupply drops. On the second day, they were able to call in 160. On the third day, they were able to call in 140. On the fourth day, they were able to call in 269. And on the fifth day, they were able to call in 129. Jake and his men have single-handedly provided the 101st Airborne Division with enough resupply to be able to stave off the Germans, to give Patton enough time to show up with his army and penetrate through the German flank, effectively ending World War II in the European theater and potentially saving the entire war as a whole. So Jake has effectively saved the day. It is now time to get out of there, get retooled, refitted, and probably never make another combat jump again, because for sure the war is over this time, right? Wrong. Apparently Patton gets in some trouble, needs some hotshot Pathfinders to jump into Prim, Germany, and call in resupply for him. So they're going to Jake and his crew yet again. Jake jumps in, saves the day for a fourth time, becoming one of the only men in history to conduct 4 combat jumps during World War II. At that point, the war is basically over, and they adopt a holding position where they pretty much just party in Germany for the rest of the time. Now, as fate would have it, Jake and his men and some of the rest of the 101st Airborne would end up taking refuge in the abandoned castle of Hermann Göring, like one of the biggest Nazi leaders during World War II. And oddly enough, a bunch of the spoils from all the countries that Germany has invaded all found their way to his castle. Fancy booze, fancy wine, and apparently he was a racehorse fan because every famous racehorse from every country that Germany invaded had made its way back to his castle. So Jake, the Filthy 13, a bunch of other 101st guys are sitting there getting drunk on fancy wine, fancy whiskey, and there's like $100 million worth of racehorse sitting in the barn, at which point they're like, let's throw on a rodeo for all the townspeople, right? Right, and that's exactly what they do. So you've got a bunch of drunk paratroopers riding around all these fancy racehorses. It's a great time. And then my personal favorite part of this entire story, while out at the rodeo, Jake would meet an attractive young lady by the name of Amelia. And Jake and Amelia would immediately hit it off and start doing some postgraduate work. I mean, dating. Oh, don't worry, it gets better. As it would turn out, Amelia's father is the leader of the local chapter of Hitler's Youth, which is just the absolute cherry on top to this entire story. How's the saying go? Screw you and the horse you rode in on. Jake's like, nah, I'm gonna raid your liquor cabinet, steal your horse, ride in on it, and then bang your daughter. This is the best possible ending to this man's epic saga in World War II that anybody could even come up with, and it happened in real life. Just to recap, Jake jumps into D-Day, wrecks house. Then jumps into Holland, wrecks house, and then eats some eggs about it. Then he pretty much single-handedly turned the tide of the Battle of the Bulge, and then he proceeds to find the closest thing he can to a Nazi princess and show her that inches are in fact better than centimeters. Shortly after that, Jake would get sent back home to America, where they would then reroute him to Arkansas so that he could see a plastic surgeon about getting his ear repaired because it had gotten mangled during one of his exploits. While in Arkansas, he would have a run-in with the military police, get in a fight with them, get thrown in the stockade yet again. Before being released, the military police commander would inform him after he gets his ears fixed, they don't ever want to see him on their post again, at which point Jake, being Jake, informs the military police commander, hey, if you ever see me again, I'm going to be a civilian and you're going to be the one with the fucking problem because I'm going to kick your ass. At which point, the military police commander files charges on Jake, and Jake is immediately chaptered out of the US Army, officially ending his military career after only 3 years, 5 months, and 26 days. Because that's just how it goes for the anti-heroes. They're are absolutely necessary in a time of war and not tolerated whatsoever during a time of peace. Jake didn't really mind though. He had accomplished what he set out to do, plus he had a huge hoard of cash that he had liberated from all the safes that he ran across in Europe. At that point in time, he goes on to explore his own alcoholism, going from place to place, town to town, job to job, just kind of doing his own thing. He ends up getting in a ton of bar fights, not because Jake instigates them, but because every local tough guy hears Jake's a paratrooper, and they want to prove how tough they are, but ultimately the only thing they proved is that they could fall down. Then, after a number of years, Jake would have a near miss with a drunk driving accident where he would almost drive his car into a concrete wall, in his own words, only missing it by a coat of paint. Because of that, Jake would decide that he needs to change his own ways. He would defeat his alcoholism, he would find God, he would start going to church every Sunday, he would find a wife, he would have some kids, and he would live happily ever after, working at the post office in his hometown of Ponca City, Oklahoma, selling stamps and slinging packages, and nobody was none the wiser that their friendly neighborhood mailman was one of, if not the greatest anti-hero of all time. So in conclusion, it's hard to put into words what an anti-hero is, but you know it when you see it. However, the best definition I have ever heard comes from Jake McNasty McNiece himself. When asked in an interview later in life how he managed to survive all of his crazy exploits, he said, and I quote, "I think I made it because God didn't have anywhere to put me." At that point in time, he was so busy, he was only putting people in one of two places, heaven or hell, and I think he knew that I would have goofed up either one of them. So here I am. And I think that might be the closest thing to a perfect definition that we're ever going to get when it comes to defining what an anti-hero is. So, thank you for watching. The best way to support the channel.
Wow, what a story. What a story. I've never heard of the man. Have heard of the Dirty Dozen. Never heard of this man. Wow. Wow. Well, he's got more videos and I'm going to cover them. So, I hope you liked it. If you have another one, let me know, because I'm just kind of picking some out. Wow. I'm going to guess he's, you know what? I'm going to guess he's dead now, but I could be wrong. Jake McNasty McNiece. Go away. Jake McNasty McNiece. I know you're there still. Jake McNiece. He died January 21st, 2013. So he was born May 24th, 1919, and he died January 21st, 2013. So 81, 84 years-ish. No. 81, yeah, 94. No, duh, you just go down, Kris. He died 93. Oh, he's in, died Chatham, Illinois. We'll just see if he's buried in Illinois. If he is, pay his grave a visit. Well, anyways, I'll find out and, you know, see what happens. But I hope you liked the video. I loved it. And until next time, have a good day, have a good night.